And that was really what happens in those very rich circles. Now, at that time, if you wanted to grow water lily in your lavish ponds to impress your friends, then the only options you really had in terms of European water lilies, which are hardy, is Nymphea, which is the genus water lily, Nymphea alba, which is the white European water lily, which is a beautiful thing, white flowers, grows naturally in ponds and lakes and things. There's also a yellow, not technically a water lily, which is Nuphar lutea, which is a different genus, but it falls within the same family as water lilies, which is actually in the fountain pond over there, and that has small yellow flowers. And that was basically your options, but they grow in the wild, so you're not going to impress anybody with something out of the wild and put it in your pond. So at the time, there was a lot of plant breeding going on, not just of water lilies, with all kinds of things, but nobody had actually done any breeding with water lilies until the 1880s. And so, just so I get a few notes here. So, there was a French nurseryman, Joseph Latour Margaret, and he was really the first person we know of who had any success with water lily breeding. And it was just at a time when water lilies from other parts of the world were being discovered and brought back. So the North American water lily, Nymphea odorata, which is also white flowered, but there's like a var rubra with pink flowered form. So that was a pink water lily, which is hardy from the ground outside. So that was already a big discovery that people might have in their ponds. But he wanted to try breeding with some of the more tropical water lilies, which came in other colours like blues and sort of peachy yellows and sort of purpley colours. And the aim was to be able to produce water lilies which were not just white or not just this one kind of var rubra pinkish colour. And so he did a lot of breeding with his water lilies, and at the time nobody else was doing this that we really know of. And in 1889 there was the World Fair in Paris, where he exhibited these water lilies he'd been breeding, and he had these lovely shades of apricot and peachy pinks and colours which had never been seen before. So you can imagine at the time, when they didn't have, it wasn't even televisions, let alone colour screens, this array of water lily colours was sending people wild, and it was getting written about in magazines, and a certain Claude Monet attended that World Fair in Paris, and he was so taken by these water lilies that he bought a load off the nurseryman, and he grew them in his own pond just sort of north of Paris, and that inspired his painting. So I'm going to just come around and show you a picture. The top picture is the nursery where Latour Marliac was doing a lot of his water lily breeding, and you can see how the ponds are sort of separated into quadrants, and underneath is Claude Monet's water lily pond, the one that inspired his very famous painting. So you can see the nursery with all these separate plants growing in little separate sections, and then Claude Monet's lovely pond, which inspired his very famous painting that I'm about to show you. Not the actual painting, just a printed version, a slightly limited colour printer. There you go. So that's a Monet painting, which then sort of started immortalising water lilies in this really romantic way, and again stirred even more fascination and interest with water lilies. And obviously all the wealthy people with their ponds wanted to have these wonderful water lilies. So this, so it was very, very successful. Now, the breeder, Marliac, well, actually, before I get onto that, has anyone heard of William Robinson, who's a British... Yeah, what did you mind sharing? What do you know about William Robinson?
Just that he was a Victorian who liked finding new types of existing plants but doing different colours and different things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. He was actually quite good friends with Gertrude Jekyll, and one of the things he's quite famous for in terms of garden design is that at the time they sort of had these very, very formal gardens in Victorian parks with carpet bedding and blah, blah, blah. And then on the sort of upper middle class estates, you'd have this lovely arts and crafts style garden. So like if you go to Hidcote Manor or some of these National Trust properties, you get this very like English country garden. Mostly this is the arts and craft garden style, which he didn't really like. He felt that gardens should be a little bit more wild. We should be allowing self-seeding even more, and so some of his idea of more naturalistic planting schemes, he influenced Gertrude Jekyll, and that's why arts and craft gardens went from being quite curated to being a bit more free-flowing and let things self-seed and still curate it but have a more natural approach. So I find it kind of odd But he really liked water lilies, it's highly bred water lilies, using species from various species around the world, not native, not natural things. But he really liked them, so he had them in Graveside Manor over in Sussex, where he lived, and he helped to promote these in the UK, and they became quite well known about in the UK. And so that's kind of the early history of water lily breeding. Latour Marliac was quite close-lipped about his breeding programs, and so people didn't really know how he managed to successfully cross-pollinate some of the different water lily species and hybrids. So not an awful lot of breeding went on after his death in 1911. And it was actually when some of these water lilies, the originally French-bred ones, were taken over to North America, that some of the North American nursery breeders did further breeding, including a guy called, I'm really bad at remembering names, Perry D. Solcombe. So if you ever see a water lily, if you think of getting one and it's got Perry something in it, it will be this American breeder. And what he did was, he was trying to get kind of deeper, darker colours, with richer, ruby sort of colours. So this is Perry's Fire Opal, which is a really stunning flower, but it's also a slightly smaller growing plant. And what you can see in here is we've got these are some of the earlier water lilies, kind of going from here around to the yellow over there. Much bigger growing plants, so they're fine if you have a massive pond, but what if you've got a smallish pond in your back garden and you want to have a gorgeous water lily that won't swamp the whole thing? So that was some of the American breeding as well. And you can see this one here, this is Black Princess. The flowers aren't quite open, but really dark flowers, but on a plant, oh actually there's one next one, which you could grow in like a medium garden pond. So that was the next stage of water lily hybridization, but that was in the 1980s. So there was a big gap from 1911 all the way to the 80s, where we just had the kind of existing ones and no further breeding work was done. But the holy grail of water lilies is this idea of a blue flowered water lily which is hardy. Now there is a blue water lily which is an Egyptian, it's found in Egypt, in the Nile, in the tributaries of the Nile, Nymphea caerulea, which caerulea means blue, which has really stunning, they're held quite high above out of the water compared to most water lilies, but it's not hardy. So you can't grow it in this cool climate, you can only grow it if you have a glass house. So its commercial potential is not very good. So the holy grail has been, how can we breed with that and get some blue genes into hardy water lilies and come out with actually blue, even kind of lavendery purple flowers would be nice, because that still didn't exist either. One of the big troubles is that the chromosome number in tropical water lilies is different to hardy water lilies overall, so they won't cross-pollinate because the chromosomes numbers are different. Big problem, but this problem was cracked in 2007 in Thailand, which is kind of odd, that's a tropical country, hardy water lilies, but hey. By a guy who finally managed to work out how to cross-pollinate and get over the chromosome number difference or whatever, and he named his first one he released was Siam Blue Hardy, and it's the first ever proven, because within the plant genre of Nymphea, the water lilies, there's like smaller groups within that, and these groups shouldn't be able to cross-pollinate, but he managed to make it happen. So that's getting the blue tropical genes into the hardy water lily genes. So he kind of announced this. It literally had to be genetically tested to prove that he'd managed to get some of these tropical water lily genes into hardy water lily genes, because nobody believed him. But sadly, so he couldn't kind of release it initially, and very sadly, a couple of years after he launched this, there was terrible flooding in his part of Thailand, and some of the plants were completely lost, and that was the only place where they existed. And it included the loss of this blue one, the Siam Blue Hardy, so that is now lost to the world. We have the genetics of it, it's tested, but the actual plant is gone. So maybe one day with genetic advances they might be able to bring it back, a bit like the mammoth, and we'll have it again. But he did have other colour forms in this bluish purple range, so he has released since some of these hardy purple, kind of lavender and bluish colours. So now finally that holy grail has been met. The reason we have water lilies here is in the early sort of 2000s, Reverend Charles Overton, who has an interesting history. He was born in Scotland. He grew up currently where Heathrow Terminal 5 is, his family home, so that's no longer there. And he went